Okay, broadcast start.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining the webinar tonight. On camera, you can see Roger Caddell and Randy Pobst. They'll be taking you through the practical approach to data and interpreting data. Randy is a 4-time World Challenge GT champion, 2-time Rolex 24 at Daytona winner, and factory driver in an MX-5 for Freedom Autosport in the Continental Tire Sports Car Challenge Street Tuner class. My name is David Cook. I'm the Business Development Manager for Mazda Motorsports, and Roger Caddell is the National Training Manager for AIM Sports. He's been working with AIM doing these webinars and other assistance for the company for approximately 7 years now. His son Andrew, this is a note for the Mazda racers out there, son Andrew started racing Spec Miata in 05. He actually won the runoffs in 06, the very next year. Then he won our shootout, which we have coming up here in a few weeks, to earn the spot, the $75,000 prize for the MX-5 Cup in 07. And as far as my knowledge, probably the best finish for a rookie. He finished second with a couple wins. So really, really glad to have Roger helping us out tonight. Wish his son the best, and thankful to Randy as well. Without further ado, they're going to take you through this webinar. It's scheduled to be an hour long. It is recorded, and then we will have the recording posted on YouTube. I'll send that out tomorrow morning in case anybody wants to go back on it to review. The only thing that you won't be able to see with the recording will be the questions. So if you're able to find the questions box in your control panel and maybe just say a quick hi just to get yourselves comfortable with where it is and how it pops up, that'll enable also Randy and Roger, whoever's not speaking, to answer questions. So along the way during this next hour, please feel free, hopefully that's where a lot of the value comes from, to ask any questions, and the one who isn't speaking will type the answer. So enjoy, and thank you guys very much for joining tonight.
Thank you very much, David. This is Roger, and I look forward to these kind of things. These are great opportunities for everybody to learn a little bit, and I always learn something myself. So let's go ahead and just get started, and it's going to be fairly quick. We only have an hour, so that we want to cover a lot of data, and look forward to seeing some of the questions and answering some of those as well. And thank you, Randy, for helping out, invaluable help here.
Let's start off. I look forward to learning too, Roger.
Yeah, thank you. A practical approach to leveraging data. You know, where this happens to be, I happen to be the training manager for AIM, but you know, the squiggly lines are the squiggly lines, and they really do cross over in all different forms of data. So let's talk a little bit about some of those squiggly lines, but just a little bit first on a little bit of an opening. Zoom in a touch here.
It's just a little slow to react. Like this driver is going to be.
It is.
Right?
And while you're pulling it up, Randy, I know you've got a couple questions that have recently popped up. If you can maybe handle those.
Oh, so sorry.
That's okay.
I'm not seeing them, David, at the moment. I'll have to fix this.
Oops. So here is the a bit of the bigger picture zoomed in that Randy was talking about, and we can see that the driver is coming along and is trying to get back after the throttle, but it's a steady climb, and this is an MX-5 Cup car, so you know it has a little bit of power, but not a ton, so you can get away with a little bit more of a steep curve here, and then a little bit of throttle off on the way out, obviously, in this particular case. So there was a problem on the exit where the driver got after the throttle, and then partway up the on the exit, probably ran out of track. Maybe an understeer or it was an oversteer. We could look at some other channels that we have to understand why better, but we do know right off the bat that the driver went to full throttle and then had to get out of the throttle. And those are those big, pointy things, sending down. So we had to go from 100% down to 30% to get the car to do what it wanted to do, then back to the floor, and then came up here, and then this area up in this area had to get back out of the throttle again. So throttle on exit. We'd like to be able to get after the throttle and get it up to the full throttle and not have to have those releases in the middle of the corner.
Okay, so answered one little question. I'm catching up. I found the questions, though, David, so I'm making progress. But as Roger was pointing out, you should go to the throttle one time,
for example,
and that throttle should only be going up and never down, 99.9% of the time as you leave a corner. So what we have here is a fail. And we can probably look at other aspects of the data that help point out why this happened too. Also, maybe
exactly.
Straightening the hands too soon, or you can look at your G-forces, and this driver, he or she may have given up too much cornering too soon. And you see the cornering G's drop, acceleration G's come up, and then boom, you get in trouble because it happened too soon. This really is a good example of
a bad example.
Bad example, yeah. And this is far more common, and it happens to a lot of us because we all want to get that throttled as soon as possible. But I found that most drivers get to the throttle too soon. So they end up doing this. You stand on a corner and watch a bunch of cars go through that corner, and you're going to hear bop, 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 like that. If you hear that, you can beat that guy. And the way you beat him is by being on a throttle. Well, actually, this trace, if it were not so vertical and it was at more of an angle, there would not have had to be the big drop towards the end.
Exactly.
You roll that in, your speed gradually increases as your steering decreases. Steering, cornering, and acceleration are opposites. Pedals and steering are opposites. And this is a good example here where we got too much pedal for the amount of steering, right? And you have to take something out. Something's got to give. And that is speed right there, isn't it, Roger?
Exactly. And you were mentioning all of this costs speed, and that's never a good thing. And you talked about this is just the first hint, right? The throttle drop is just the first hint saying, oh, your next question should always be why. And you need to answer that question. And if you don't answer that question, you don't know what to fix. And if you don't know what to fix, you're going to keep getting beat. And that's the worst thing in the world. So we have to get to the answer why. I always use sometimes you can get lucky without knowing why, and you end up on a podium on a Saturday at a club race, and then you're racing it on a Sunday. And the worst thing in the world is to go out there and end up, on a podium getting a win or a second or a third, and then you go back out with the same people, the same car, the same conditions, and you finish 12th the next day, and you don't know why. And that is where data really helps you to know those changes you made, they were right or they were wrong, and you know not to do them the opposite way. So data is really about answering the question why. Let's look at what maybe a better example would be. We're zoomed out a little bit here. We're going to jump in a little bit deeper here and take a look at this one. You can see that the throttle has started to build from the lower end, down here at the bottom side, and then squeezed up, and the driver is taking what the car will give. And like Randy said, as you're feeding your hands, back to center, your foot is almost like on that same string, and you're actually feeding more throttle as you release the steering. And you can see the driver went after some, hesitated a little bit when they maybe felt the car doing some things, and then was able to squeeze on up to full throttle for the next straightaway. Steady application.
One of the things this tells me about this driver, that hesitation bit there is he's got his eyes in the right place. He's looking well ahead, and that gives you the information, and you start adding that throttle and the tires. You're trying to keep it right on the edge, right on the limit. And so you go a little over the limit, and you feel the car, and you see the car moving a little bit wide. You got to have your eyes in the right place to be able to identify that, right? If you're looking ahead, add that throttle, feel the car lose a little bit of grip. It's okay. That's all we can take right here. It hooks up a little more, and you continue adding some more. You see, this driver was a little more careful after this mid-acceleration correction, too. But he never backed off. It was more and more and more and more and more, all the way to full. A good trace, and it shows a driver that's looking ahead and really looking for the limit. I have found it is always better to be the err on the side of under, because going over costs you time. And that's why smooth is fast. Really smooth. Anytime you're dropping back, it is more costly. Well, not every time, but most times it's more costly to go too far and back up than to go not quite far enough, but just keep rolling it in to full.
And I always like to, yep, I agree with that. And I also agree with smooth is not only fast, but it's fast in the longer, at the end of 30 minutes or the end of a 45-minute race, you have something left on the tires, you have something left on the brakes. Smooth is fast in the long term, which is you win the race at the end, you don't win the race at the beginning. So.
And you crash less.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. Let's talk about shifting speed by looking at the throttle position. Let's see. Let's take a look at what that trace looks like. And I'm seeing some of the questions. I haven't had a chance to I'm not the world's fastest typer, but there is some information we are going to talk about on solos and GPS-based systems where you don't have throttle position. So some of you that are asking that question, we will get to some other look and feel of some other things. Plus, my final thing that we're going to talk about today is some math channels, and I'm going to make available to anybody that writes me an email and asks for it. I have some math channels that are based strictly around what in our AIM world, the Solo device, which is a GPS-based data logger, that we can do some coasting and braking and throttle on and some things without that actual sensor. It's not as good, obviously, but it's pretty darn successful. So we'll take a look at those a little bit later. Shifting. When you're shifting, you can actually take a look at that throttle position sensor, and we can take a look at a couple of, again, a bad example, then a good example of what a slow shift versus a high speed, a faster shift, and see what it looks like in the data. So let's zoom in a little bit on this one right here. You can see here that the throttle position in the lower half, the driver's coming along, and we can actually just use a measure tool, and we can click on from when it goes from 100% throttle down to 0 and back up to 100%, and you can make the assumption, even without a gear position sensor, that the driver, that's how long it took to shift. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more. And let's take a look at this guy where these arrows are pointing. So right across here, the throttle position's coming along. It dips down and comes back up. And this particular shift here was 0.55 seconds, a little over half a second. And when you start to see that, and then you take your eyes up and you look at the result of the speed trace up above, and you can see where the speed trace was climbing nice, and then with that fairly slow shift, it basically goes horizontal for a while and then starts back up again, and you lose that, and you not only lose that for that time, for that moment of the shift, but of course you're that 2 miles or 3 miles an hour slower than the guy that had a better shift all the way down the rest of the straightaway. What do you think about that, Randy?
Well, and fast shifting, it can be huge. It can be a free time thing, as long as your transmission can take it. You are limited, and you have to listen to your transmission, right? That if you have to force it, you're going to hurt the car long term. So it has to be as quickly as you can do it without hurting anything. And every car has a different limit on that, and they're getting better and better all the time, right? And it's getting to the point where we don't have to do this anymore, right? It's automatic in the paddle shift cars. Your engineer might adjust the shift time or the throttle drop time for you. That's another way to mechanically or from an engineering standpoint change your shift speeds. But huge time is available. This is a really good bad example, and I've seen this happen. Right, you're on the straightaway next to somebody, you got the same car, and on the shift, all of a sudden you're pulling them because you pulled it off quicker. But I've also seen drivers that pushed it too far, did their shifts so hard and so quick that their transmissions didn't make it to the end of the race.
Or they miss shifts and lose even more time. So, there is a balance there, obviously. You have to be correct.
Yes.
Let's jump up and look at it. What might be a good example. Yeah, I read a couple of questions on. It's going to be hard for me to answer written. And
you want me to talk more?
Somebody was asking about the speed trace and GPS and filtering of GPS speed traces, and two or three people actually ask it, so I'll answer it. But yes, a GPS trace, there is a bit of filtering that's going on there on the speed, and so there's not a nice abrupt edge. This particular example we're about to look at is a normal wheel speed sensor. So you're going to see a little bit even better of instantaneous speed traces. So yeah, and in AIM with our GPS traces, they are a little bit filtered to make them work a little bit better for the bulk of people. So let's look in a little bit deeper here. This is a Spec Miata, and if we zoom in just one more little bit, we can see here. Oops, I went the wrong way. Darn it, wrong buttons. So let me jump one more ahead. So this is the throttle position trace down here at the bottom, and this upshift was 0.18 seconds. And on the speed trace up here above, this is on the rear drive line. This is during the 2006 runoffs, and you can see that the little wiggle of the speed sensor there data was when the drive line just shook from the shift. So we can pick up the speed trace from the speed trace. We can see where the shifts are as well as the speed trace. I'm sorry, the throttle position. My son quickly told me in 2005. Quick little story there, but I was always preaching to kind of take it easy on the transmission. Take it, don't beat on it too hard. There's no reason for it. And he would go out and run, and he'd come back in. He says, no, if I shift a little bit harder, I'm pulling on these guys if I abuse it just a touch, and so we started looking at data, and we started looking at these shifts, and I'd tell them to run 3 or 4 laps of normal shifting, and then in maybe some speed shifting stuff, and as long as you're not missing shifts. And then the data quickly showed that in a low horsepower car like a Spec Miata, that quicker shift really did help, and Spec Miatas have gone up in price a little bit, but back then I was paying, I think it was $850 or something like a transmission, and I had to replace it halfway through the year. So a tenth or so of lap time, over a course of a lap, it ended up being 3 or 4 tenths of speed for $800 for halfway through the year. That is cheap speed. So it was like, beat on that transmission all you want, man. If it's going to make it go that well, as long as you're not missing shifts. That was the key to me. So this was just a good example of this driver and the 2 examples here were about 3,500ths of difference, and that was, you can see here in the speed trace that it was almost a straight tangent line, right through the shift, where the other one dropped 2 or 3 miles an hour. So again, balance it out and take a look at your data, and I think you'll find the optimum spot to be shifting at.
Hey Roger, do you think we had a little wheel spin here? With a speed shift, or maybe he let the engine overspeed and catch it with the clutch?
Yeah, in this particular case, the way that the speed sensors hook on our car, what we did is it was on the drive line in the back, and it was all rubber mounted. So the drive line actually shook in the car every time you would shift, and you were just seeing that the movement and the spin up and slow down and movement of the magnet going past the speed sensor would always pick these things up. So it's a Spec Miata, and it's at 85 miles an hour. I would suggest that it's probably not wheel spin. Right? So let's jump down one more. Let's see what the next topic is. Brakes, and this is an area, and I'll start off just real quick, Randy, and this is an area where I give these seminars from January through May, virtually every weekend somewhere across the country. I'm giving a seminar to 35 data users, and the one area that is the least the least watched in data and the biggest area of gain for amateur racers and track day guys is the brakes. And there's an area there that everybody's data that we look at and start to work with, the application of the brake and the release of the brake are two areas that they always grab a lot of information from data sessions. So what's your idea on the brakes? And then we'll jump into looking at some brake pressure release.
One of the most critical steps between being just a regular driver at the races and becoming one of the fast guys is at the end of the brake zone, is being able to come off the brake slowly even though you're carrying, and at the same time when it does this, carry more speed into the corner. It is really difficult for drivers to make that breakthrough to the next level, because they feel like they want to enter the corner faster, right? Well, if you're going too fast, what do you want to do? Brake more. And at the end of the brake zone, you want to start releasing the brake, but continue braking, because for the same reason that you roll the throttle on gradually. Depends on the corner too and the way your car handles, but it's that smoothness, and it's blending what was straight ahead braking into full cornering. You want to see brake pressure gradually coming off. And in just the same way you want to go gradually on the throttle, you want to be gradually coming off the brake. Depends a lot on your setup, how your car handles, but it's a technique, strategy, capability that separates the mid-pack from the fast guys. It's being able to ease out of the brakes and blend the end of your brake zone into your corner. And we can see that on data very clearly.
And we're going to.
Brake hard and straight, and then boom, drop off of that brake, and pow, go onto the throttle. Right, Roger? Many times when you see somebody dropping straight off the brake, they also come in the throttle too hard and back off and back on and back off. And these are things that separate mid-pack, back of the pack from the front guys, and we can see it in the data.
You can see it on the track, and you can see it on the data, and
you hear it.
And you can hear it. And I remember Road Atlanta a couple weeks ago when you guys had your discussion with I think it was Tom Long that was talking about, and he kept bringing up the platform and how he would use his feet and his hands to keep the platform from becoming upset. And he would, give it a little bit more brake to get a little bit more front tire grip and transition. And the transition from those two, as a driver, you can make those things happen. So if we look at this one a little bit closer, you can see a good example of a driver, getting after the brakes, pretty hard, and a big U in the middle of it, which shouldn't be either. And then when he does finally maximize his brake pressure here, and then partway through the braking zone, he just dumps the brake pedal, totally off the brake pedal. And that is going to, first you stood the car up on the nose, then you had this big U of brake pressure where you released it. The car settles back down on the rear tires and loses some front grip, and then he stood on it again and stood it up on the nose, and then he dropped off totally. And now the car is a bit of a rocking horse, or and you end up with wearing tires out. Of course, you're not as fast in the corner at the time, but you also then are overheating pieces and parts and going to be slow in the long run as well.
It's not as smooth, is it? And this trace actually relates to a question just asked by Hillary Anderson here about calculating brake lockup. On that subject, why did this driver drop? Why is there that dip in brake pressure, right?
Yeah.
Oh, wait,
why?
this isn't a wheel speed sensor. Never mind.
It's brake
If
pressure.
this was the wheel speed sensor, then we would look for dips in that indicate the amount of lockup. And a lot of times, if this was a wheel speed sensor, we probably would have seen a dip here in the wheel speed.
Absolutely.
And that would have been why there was a dip. Not always, but many times you see those go together.
Absolutely. So let's take a look at what maybe a this zoomed in a little bit more, and that abrupt release of the brake pressure, it will not provide a good transition from braking to acceleration. It's just not possible. And the driver has a lot to do with how how good that car is handling. Engineers can only work so hard and adjust so many things if the driver is really irritating the car. So let's look at what maybe a little bit better example might look like. So this is back to a I think this is Spec Miata. Let's zoom in a little bit here. Yes, there is there is some drop off here, and the braking is moving around. This is that 2006 runoff. So it was a half wet, half dry track. So there are times when the driver is doing some different things with his foot, trying to make some things happen. But you can see here, basically the peak of the brake was at the middle of the braking, and then he starts to release, and when he's actually ready to go to the throttle and has got the car rotated and the trail braking is happening, which you can kind of see from the shape of the speed trace coming down, even without lateral G's. And then when the time came, he drops the brake and then squeezes onto the throttle. So this is a little bit better example than the other one, where it was just an absolute straight drop off.
Now, Roger, is this a wheel speed sensor?
The upper one is a rear wheel speed sensor in this case, and it's a brake pressure sensor on the bottom half. Good point. I should be naming those every time, and I haven't done that.
Yeah, it's a rear. Most times we see lockup in the front, especially on a Spec Miata, but most non-ABS cars will tend to lock the front because it's much more drivable. And you could look for those little dips in the speed trace. If it doesn't go to zero or close to zero, you're probably not hurting the tire.
Right.
But that best grip comes with very little slide, just like in a corner. And it doesn't heat the tire up as fast, et cetera, also. And this is real interesting if it's a drying track.
Yeah.
The lower the grip is, the more gentle those on and offs should be to go fast.
Yeah, need to be.
Yeah, it should be. And so drivers that do well in the rain are smooth. And because smoothness pays off in low grip. And that's what we're seeing here with this gradual release of the brake as the driver is entering the corner, probably. You also might see a little bit of this from a downforce car. When the speeds come down, the brake pressure has to come down because you don't have that downforce anymore, adding grip.
Absolutely.
They're tricky to stop.
Yeah.
They're tricky.
I'll bet. The next one is one that you mentioned in at the Road Atlanta webinar, and it's something that I try to look for as well, and it's consistency of braking during the downshifts. And
yeah, that's a classic.
Yeah, it's an area that a lot of people can improve on in almost everybody. So let's take a look at maybe what a bad example of that might look like. So here, the first thing we're going to look at is zoom in just a touch more, and we'll take a look. In this case, I left the speed in the upper half, the throttle position, and the brake pressure at the bottom. And so you can take a look at this guy here, the brake pressure here at the bottom. You can see he jumped out of the throttle, it came down, and he rolls onto the brakes. And then every time you see the blip of the throttle, you can see the movement of the brake pressure. And what that does is a driver, it's a skill that it is very, very rare that somebody has this skill right off the bat. But it's something, if you work on it, you can actually make this be very, very good. We're going to see a good example here in a second. But you can see that the inaccuracy of the driver's foot as he's using on the brakes, and this is again upsetting the apple cart. It's a rocking horse, and it's loading the front end and releasing, loading and releasing, and it's just going to hurt the tires, and it's going to hurt speed, and there's nothing good about this.
We've got that little throttle blip there too, Roger, right at the beginning. I wonder if maybe this driver bumped the throttle when the driver was first going to the brake.
Yeah, could well have been.
Very odd.
Yeah, sometimes you'll see the brake pressure, being touched back here, where a driver is just getting a little confidence bump of knock the pads back or whatever. But in this particular case, I think he touched the throttle with his foot as he was going down to the brake, and again, not a good thing to do. cars really don't like when you try to do both, because you're going to push the rear tires against the fronts, and you're already overloading the fronts, and then if you do touch both pedals or do something, it really irritates the car, and understeer happens almost immediately when you do that. So let's take a little bit closer look at that. So let's look at here's a close-up zoom of that exact same area. We already kind of talked about it. Let's look at a good example and see what it looks like here. I don't have the throttle position on this particular one, but I do have the engine RPM, and you can see when the driver is blipping it. So what you've got is your speed trace is dropping down, your RPM. You can see the blips in the throttle happening here, and here is a brake pressure sensor that's going across. Yes, there's some change, but we're talking about a 1400 psi brake pressure change. So we're talking about 50 to 100 pounds of pressure change here during the blips of the throttle. That's not too shabby.
Looking smooth, and this becomes easier with modern transmissions. Again, it's surprising how age patterns are starting to seem more and more antique, because with the paddle shifters and all, the most modern ones are doing the blips for you, but with sequential transmissions you can mess with brake, and then your blip and your braking are much easier to separate, but still an important issue that you can see in data traces.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's jump to the next one. There's a little zoomed in area of it there for you. During those blips, there's a little bit of change in the brake, but not a ton.
And you can see a big change in the revs.
Absolutely, yeah.
So there's a lot of throttle coming in there.
Here we're going to show you a little bit about steering. So we've gone with our feet here at first with throttle and with braking. We're going to look at a little bit of some steering information, and especially focused on the exit oversteer. You have something to add to that before we actually take a look at the graphs?
The steering trace is a great way to really for the engineer to understand what the driver's saying, because many drivers don't see what the car's doing very well, frankly. And if a driver doesn't, you can look at that steering trace, and the steering trace tells you, especially oversteer. It's so easy looking at the trace to pick out a driver correcting. I was picking on a guy not long ago. He was telling me how well his car was handling and how balanced it was. And I was looking at his steering trace, the big picture, all at once. And when I'm looking at oversteer, that's countersteer, so the trace goes the opposite way. We'll be looking at that in a second here with Roger. And I can look at the whole lap, and I'm like, well, wait a minute, you had a big correction here, and a big correction here, and a big one here. Your car's not terribly well balanced. That's everywhere around the track. The data makes it hard to lie in some situations.
Exactly, and you talk about that, and here's a full lap that I just brought up, and you can see just by looking at the steering trace, which is the lowest one here of the third one in the window, and you can kind of see the lefts and the rights of the steering wheel, and then where I've got two of them highlighted here, there are two large corrections. There's one there, and there's one over here where there's a big fallout. It doesn't take, I'm not the smartest guy in the world. None of these engineers do these things. We can pick up this stuff pretty easily, and you can see that stuff pretty quickly. So, and then, okay, now we know it did it. The next question always is what? Why? Why? And was the driver chasing the car, or was the car creating the, was the car creating the problem or the driver creating the problem? Those are the things we got to continue to dig in and then solve it. So let's zoom in on one of these and take a look at it a little bit closer and see what we see. So here, exit. I got two examples of exit oversteer here. There's other ways the next couple slides we're going to show you a different way of looking at this, but let's just look just at the steering position, which is the red one at the bottom. And you can see I left the throttle position up here in the upper half. So the driver turns in, and he's starting to feed in the steering wheel as it goes up. He's dumped the throttle totally out here pretty quickly, which may or may not upset the car. And then he's going along here and he's coasting for a little bit, letting the car have maximum lateral grip as he's spooling up on the throttle, and I'm sorry, on the steering. And then right here he goes and he steps into the throttle and starts to throttle up. The car has steering wheel input into it. I drew this black line on there just so you could see this exact spot where it starts to lose steering wheel is exactly where the driver starts to throttle up. And those timings are important to understand what to fix. So normally you'd have your cursor here, you could just click on there and you could actually see exactly what's going on. So I just threw this little black line in here. And you can see that as soon as the driver starts to throttle up, the more opposite lock on the steering wheel, to a point down here where while I show that the car has exit oversteer, clearly it does, but I also mentioned up here, but it was manageable, and oops, let's say no on that. And I say that it's manageable, and the reason I say it's manageable is drivers are paid, to get the most out of their car, and their job is to kind of get after the throttle as soon as they can. There's always going to be some, you're floating the car on the head of that pin and keeping it, right there underneath you. So there'll always be some movement here of keeping that under you. The driver gave it some opposite steering, but he never had to get out of the throttle. As you can see, once it's got to full throttle, he's able to keep the throttle after it. So, and then it came back to being a fairly neutral car as the driver got towards the exit and was able to free up and open up the steering even more and more, and then the normal steering happens. So you can pick up on the exit oversteer quickly, and you can see exactly why it happened as the driver was throwing throttle at it.
Okay, this is digging deep. I love this. And this is a way that an engineer can look at data and decide how the car is handling. One downside of this, I'm warning to you engineer types, is that your driver may be aware of this oversteer that shows up on throttle application and may be deliberately being very gentle with throttle application. This is a situation that reminds me of some moments in my career where the engineer didn't want to listen to what I had to say. Could look at the data and see what the car's doing. Yeah, but you need your loose nut behind the wheel to be explaining, well, the reason why I say it's loose, but it doesn't show up on the data, right? Because I'm being extra careful, because when it gets loose, it's a bad thing. And so this is a way in that data can actually mislead you. And so it's still important to have the combination of the driver and the engineer. I think a lot of our listeners tonight are one-man teams. And you do your own data analysis. And you can still think of this same fact. Or you show it to a friend and you get this advice back, but that the driver can be avoiding situations that are caused by this. Another way you'll see that is you'll see it in the early laps and not in the later laps, if you dig down that deep. Something that I find very useful is when you scroll through laps, write a blown up section of the data, and you scroll through, okay, what did I do next lap, and next lap, and next lap? And you get these, and if you keep seeing this repeated pattern, it makes it more likely that you're looking at something real, something that's very much more so in the car setup, whereas a driver will probably be a little less consistent with a big correction. The chassis is, if it's loose, it's going to stay that way, and you may see it consistently lap to lap to lap as you scroll through your session.
Yeah, this 1 hour webinar doesn't give us a chance to do too much of that, but I am a big, and on the last slide I think we're going to talk a little bit about it, but trends are absolutely critical in looking at data. Making an adjustment off of looking at this screen that we're looking at right now and making an adjustment off of one corner of one lap of a 20 lap race is silly. You have to look for the trends. If it's one lap, maybe the driver misplaced the car by 3 or 4 feet, missed the apex, and then the car is loose coming off. Okay, well, that bad on them, but it's one lap. It's not a big deal. We look for trends. Always look for trends. This one here, this example here that I brought up is the same kind of a thing, but it's actually a whole different situation. Same car, a little bit later in that same lap, but here the driver has gone to full throttle in a real hurry, okay, and has a lot of steering here at the bottom of down here at the red. He's got some steering thrown into it. Down here in the middle is 0. So, and as he's driving off at full throttle, he starts to release the steering wheel, getting out to the exit of the curve, and all of a sudden it goes to oversteer. And we'd have to dig in a little bit more. With only these 2 pieces of data, we don't have everything we need, but the driver was able to manage straight through it and has stayed at full throttle all the way through with this big correction here near the exit of the corner. So in this particular case, I had the data and I knew what it was, and in this particular corner, it's one of those corners where as you're coming off, the track falls away and you lose some of the camber of the track, and this particular corner is known for having a little bit of late exit oversteer, and so the driver was just working around that particular issue. Probably should not allow it to do this too much because you're going to wear out that in this case that left rear tire, but that's what happened here.
10B at Road Atlanta?
Yeah, absolutely. No? Yeah, yes, it absolutely can be. Yes. So,
no, turn 10B at Road Atlanta.
Yeah, yep.
That's that way.
Yep, exactly. Let's talk a little bit about understeer and what that looks like. And I brought this up, and you can find it in just looking at the steering trace. But I wanted to introduce lateral G's in with steering in this particular example. And so it's going to look a lot like the other one did, but I threw one more channel in there. And this is the way that I look at data when I have steering and lateral G's. This is kind of my home base for looking for understeer. Other people do it different ways. We can have some math channels that do some certain things, but in this particular case, let's zoom in on this turn 1 and take a look at it and give you an idea of what I kind of look for when I'm looking for understeer, or when this jumps out at me as understeer. And I'm going to zoom in one more little bit just to give you yeah. So here, and this happens to be this is the old Cleveland temporary circuit. Back in 2007, we ran MX5 Cups there. So this is an absolutely flat track. But so here, down at the bottom side, the red line at the bottom is steering. The black trace above it is lateral G's. And then we've got speed trace and throttle position up in the upper half. And what I tend to do is I tend to start watching what the lateral G's, the buildup of the car, and when it stops, when the lateral G stops getting higher, stops building, and the driver continues to turn the steering wheel, by definition, that's understeer, right? So in this particular case, and for me, it works, and we could stack these traces right on top of each other and maybe even see it even better, but I drew a yellow line here where the lateral G's have stopped building, and then you can see that the red steering trace continues to build. And then from that point down here to the peak of the steering down at the base, at the bottom of this, that is understeer. The driver continued to turn the steering wheel, and the car no longer generated more lateral G's. So the driver was wanting more. And it's kind of interesting that sometimes goes away by itself just by scrubbing off speed. Sometimes the track finally comes to you and you get a little bit of banking. In this particular case, I drew a second yellow line over here off to the right edge, and it's right where the driver went to throttle. Now, it's interesting that got past the apex of the corner, and the understeer started to go away when this particular car, when they got to the throttle. So this problem of, from an engineering standpoint, you would want to start fixing this car. The understeer is under braking or under coasting, so that is the area that you'd want to start to fix this particular car. Or the driver drove in too fast. There's all sorts of little things that we can start to understand, but I wanted to show you how, the way I looked at it. Yeah, absolutely.
A late entry ABS understeer maybe.
Exactly. This happens to be an MX-5 Cup car, so it does have ABS. But in this particular case, I wanted just to introduce the thought of using lateral Gs and steering and stacking them on top of each other, and seeing the difference of when you continue to turn the steering wheel and lateral Gs stop building. Classic sign of understeer. It works pretty well for me.
I don't like this throttle trace, frankly. That's how critical that is. And it's probably because time was lost here with this entry understeer, and that's the only way the driver could go to all this throttle, and it helped balance the car, and the corner Gs came right up, didn't they?
Exactly, and you talk about, and I'm a huge fan of drivers have to do what they have to do while they're out there. Myself, the mechanics, nobody can help them once they're out there, so they have to drive around whatever problem they have. And in this particular case, jumping after the throttle seemed to balance out the car and get the car to rotate. So whatever the driver has to do, right? There's not much more we can do to help them. So other than listen on the radio and be beat up a little bit from the way the car was set up, right?
Blame the team.
There you go. There you go.
Blame your dad.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. We're right at our hour limit, and I have one more little section that I want to talk about. And it's not going to be a bunch of deep information, but I want to make this available to everybody. I'm going to give you my my email address on the last slide, but I'm going to show you a couple of pretty cool math channels that a lot of people really like that we work with, and a couple things we can measure very quickly by doing some simple math channels is coasting and maybe some braking are the two examples I'm going to show you. There's a bunch of other things. So let's take a look at something real quick, and I'm not going to go into it in depth. I'm not going to talk about the math channel, but in this particular case, I'm showing across the top speed. I'm showing a throttle position is the blue one. I've just got a brake switch. You could have brake pressures, different ways of doing it, and we can actually then calculate from the data that anytime you're less than, let's say, 50% on the throttle, might be 25%, and the brakes are not on, by definition you're coasting, right? If you got both feet off of the pedals, and we can actually add that time up with a quick little math channel. And in this particular case, I've got the cursor over here at this edge, and it's showing me that for the course of this lap, the driver had actually coasted for 7.95 seconds. And those are things that, especially with drivers that are getting the hang of things and want to try to work on their foot speed, these are things we can look at and quantify for every lap that you go out there with a simple math channel, and then look at your improvement. I'm always the first one to tell you, though, there's times when coasting is the right thing to do. And so,
especially front drivers.
Yeah, we're not trying to get to zero, but we also don't want to be at 25 seconds, right? So there's a balance here, and let me jump ahead one slide and go to what we call a channel report in the Race Studio software. And across the top here, I've just created 4 of them, and there's only 2 laps. This happened to be a qualifying lap. So over the course of 11,300 feet of per lap distance, on the coasting, on the time, on these 2 laps, one lap was 9.60 seconds, one was 7.95, and in feet, we can actually do the math and do the feet that you actually coasted as well, not just time. And 1,036 feet for the one lap, 840 feet for the other. And then just another math channel that I built real quickly, how long were you on the brakes? We can actually look at this and say if anything above 200 psi or when the brake switch is on, we can actually add that time up. And on these particular 2 laps, the one lap was 15.2 seconds of on brakes and 15.9 seconds on the other end. And the far right column is the number of feet that the driver was actually on the brakes. So little things like this, if you had a 20-lap session, you could actually start to make these math channels really quickly, and we can actually add up these things and really watch it. And it's kind of interesting that the way the AIM software works is it bolds the fastest lap of these 2 qualifying laps. And the fastest lap is the upper one, the 131.5 versus a 131.7, and the driver actually coasted, for almost 2 seconds, about 2 seconds more and about 200 and some more feet on the faster of the 2 laps. It's not always a correlation. Sometimes you do want to coast. All that lateral G, you really need to keep it. But it's absolutely something that can do you some really good. And if anybody wants, I'm going to jump down one more slide, and then I'll pass it over to Randy for a second. One of the, we'll talk about it in a second. Those math channels, they're all built for the AIM software. I've got an Excel spreadsheet that explains them all and all the settings. If anybody wants them, the last slide that we're going to bring up, I have my email address. And if somebody wants to email me asking for those, I will turn right around and send you these, and they're all built, all ready to go for either GPS-based, like the Solo guys, or if you have throttle position and brake pressures, I've got them built for that as well. So if anybody wants to take a look. You have anything to add to that real quickly, Randy, before I jump into the last couple slides?
Well, it's not a data thing. It's that you touched on. I love this coasting example that you gave, because one of my favorite delineators, again, between almost first and first is being able to use late entry off throttle to slow the car without the brakes. In a lot of corners, there's a time where you'll have no brake, but you'll still be slowing down just using the drag of the tires before you go back to throttle. And I think that's why this driver was faster, is that this driver did a better job of filling the friction circle by being able to continue slowing, but without using the brakes. The brakes would have been too much, because just turning a car slows it down a lot. And in a lot of corners, the brake zone does not end with the brakes. You do that slow release, and then you're off the brake, and you're not on the throttle yet. You're just waiting for that car to finish pointing. I actually love cars that handle that way. I try to make them handle that way, because they fill the friction circle, and you can fill it perfectly. And this is a great example of that. Thank you, Roger, for showing that.
Absolutely. And I actually thought about following. It's funny that you mentioned that. Funny that you mentioned that. I actually thought about following this slide with the friction circle graph, because I feel the same exact way. That is exactly the right approach. So
I'm happy to hear you say that.
But I knew we were going to be running out of time. Let's talk about a couple other things that are available to the folks that are watching, if you want to. There are one of my main jobs during the time that I'm not on the road is to build some training videos, and they're short, quick little things, and they're all about the basics of. One of the most popular ones lately is I have downloaded my data, now what? And it's kind of based around the Solo user. So those are two of them that are out there. I've got one that is just about friction circles and how to build them in our software, and on and on and on. There's about 25 videos that are out there on a YouTube site, and the address is on there. You can go take a look at those if you want. And then one other thing that I did want to talk about was, and I did pull out my trending slide. I wanted to make sure. I didn't think I'd have enough time. So trends are really important. We did a lot of things kind of wrong here today by looking at just one single little spot of a single trace. You always want to look at trends. And the other thing I want to do is leave my contact information here. Is if you drop me an email at roger@aimsports.com this evening or tomorrow, anybody that's listening and you want those math channels, absolutely, I will turn those right around. I've got some documentation all written up how to bring them in, how to use them, how to modify them for your math channel, your channel names and things like that. So send me that, and then we'll talk about that. And also, there's starting in about 2 weeks, I start my seminar season. I go all over the country. I'll be in Dover, New Jersey, in a couple of weeks, giving a basic and advanced 8-hour course on data analysis, and I'll be all over the country. We do probably 20 or 25 of these a year. So if you're looking for those, visit aimsports.com, and there's a calendar on there that you can see everywhere that we're going to be. And we sit down and we have 1 hour to talk about it here, and it's such an in-depth thing that we'd love to have a little bit more time and actually dig into some of your own data as well. So that's all I have. I appreciate, Randy, all of your feedback and the guys from Mazda for having me. Again, anybody wants any more information, give me a holler. You have anything to close with, Randy?
Yes, sir. I really appreciate being part of this seminar and learning from you, Roger. And I want to say to Mark Hansen, who's new to racing, and to anybody really, that doing your data or looking at it soon after you've driven, even if you're not deliberately trying to learn something, you look at your data, and if it's soon after you've driven, you can relate what you're seeing to what you just did.
Absolutely.
And it helps you understand data better. You're like, oh, that line is, yeah, the brake, I was coming off kind of real slow there. And video as well. Video helps with your memory, and you watch video and you can relate that back to something you saw in the data if you want to try to understand better. And if you're looking at that data soon after you drove or while you're looking at video, you can learn to better relate those squiggly lines to what's actually happening on the racetrack. Thanks, everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Roger, Randy, thank you guys very much for all the prep that you did for tonight and for the hour plus that you just shared. And thank you, everybody, for joining as well. We'll certainly have more webinars in the future. And if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email as well at dcook13@mazdausa.com. But look forward to meeting everybody, those who I haven't met so far out of the racetrack. Have a great night.
Good night.